This is the Tabernacle podcast with John Vermilia and me, Benji Vermilia, and Britton isn't here, so what's up, John?
Hey, bud. Britton is gone, and so we're running this podcast, and it's going to be a good day. Because today, we have two of my favorite people on the planet. We have Heidi Burgess and her husband, Tim Burgess. Welcome, Tim. Heidi, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Thanks, John.
Are you sure it's good to be here? Tim's got this look in the corner like, I don't know if I'm happy to be here or not.
I talk too much is one of my main problems when I'm in a situation like this. And the valuable wisdom is going to come from Heidi. So I just am practicing biting my tongue, not because she might say something I'm embarrassed by, but because I probably would say something that I would be embarrassed by.
Oh, gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
As a husband, fellow husband, you know.
Yeah, I get it.
Okay.
And if it means anything, I don't think you talk too much. I think you have a lot of wisdom to share, and that's why you guys are here today. First of all, Britton Bishop is not here. The Bish, as I say, is in the final shoot, the final preparations to be married to the lovely Hope. That's just in a couple days from this recording. And so he was super excited to have these marriage podcasts out. And we already did a podcast that was Britton, myself, and Tim, which was God's plan for marriage, where we looked at Genesis chapter 2 and 3 and kind of broke that down. The plan for marriage before everything broke, before sin, before our first parents, invited Satan's sin and death into this world. And if you haven't listened to that, you should probably listen to that first, because we're just going to assume that you have. That was podcast 57, God's Plan for Marriage, where we looked at Genesis 2 and 3. But even though Britton's not here, which, first of all, this could go anywhere, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Tim, you have ridden in a vehicle with me when it's a car full of people. And can you describe that experience when I'm in control? When I'm in the driver's seat like I am right now?
Well, if you ride in the front and you have your eyes open, it's hellish because you see death around every corner.
See death.
And,
come on, man.
John is he used to be, he's better now, but John would be talking, changing the radio station or choosing a CD and texting his wife.
That's old.
In just frantic traffic. And I actually
put downtown Chicago.
Yeah, I put dents in his floorboard in the passenger seat trying to hit the brakes. So that's what it's like. So yeah, this could literally go any direction. Yeah. Luckily, we have a buzzer.
That's true.
For time limit, I'm assuming.
That's right. We have Benji on the buzzer for the time limit, but we have a blonde buzzer across from me sitting next to you that's also going to be...
Yeah, because
hopefully keep the governor
She
on.
calmed me.
Yes.
Because she was in that van.
My response to Tim at that time when he was squeezing your armrests and leaving dents was, Tim, if we weren't surrounded by angels, we wouldn't have made it this far.
That was the kindest, meanest thing you've ever said, right? Yeah. Or, as I say, you just become a Calvinist in those moments. You see, my first road experiences were in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. And so I think somehow I want to blame that, but I really can't. And I want to thank you, Tim, for all of your ruining of the console and dents in the floorboards and et cetera, your fake brake. I think that might have made me just a little bit of a better driver because I wanted to focus.
Do you remember, like, the next 10 times you and I traveled, what would you do?
Offer to let you drive?
You handed me the keys every time.
Exactly.
Which is exactly what you do in a relationship when you see that things aren't balanced, which is like friendship or marriage.
Oh, so you're saying that I'm Tim's ministry wife?
Yes.
Possibly.
No comment.
No comment. Okay. So let's get right to the heart of the matter. What we want to do is we want to look at Ephesians chapter 5, which probably after Genesis 2 and 3 is the most helpful or instructive for us in regards to our marriages. Now, Tim and Heidi, and this is one of the biggest reasons, besides the fact that Heidi has wisdom, godly wisdom, like a Titus 2 woman in and of herself. She's been a part of this ministry as long as Tim and I have. In fact, probably before Tim.
Yeah.
We're just super grateful for you. You finished all of your studies within counseling, or just about, Just about. You've counseled, I'm going to go ahead and say thousands. when you add students, teenagers, godly conversations, spiritual conversations, people that actually made an appointment. But most of all, Tim and Heidi have been married for 39 years. And so we know that every marriage is different. And we're not saying that we're not even saying that Tim and Heidi's marriage is perfect. But in my mind, it's 39 years perfect because it's still going strong.
Yeah.
Agree or disagree with that statement? That it's 39 years perfect.
I got to think about that, but yeah, I think.
So on a scale of 1 to 10, don't look at each other. Where is your marriage right now? On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the greatest it's ever been, 1 being, this is barely hanging on. Heidi says a 9. Why a 9?
Because...
Why not a 10? Because look, you're Christians, you're saved, you're in ministry. It's got to be perfect.
We're human.
We're human.
And sinful and prideful and those kind of things. So 10 is heaven.
10 is heaven. Good for you.
It's probably as good as you can get on earth.
9. Tim?
I was going to say 9.5, but I guess I'd put it at 8.5. And the 0.5 to Heidi's 9 is there's a lot of room for me to grow yet. God's really revealing some things about my personal character that highly affects our marriage. And that's the 0.5. It's a work in progress right now.
Gotcha.
If you were to ask wife-wise, like, how pleased are you? Then it's a 10.
Well played.
Thank you.
So
but I'm not trying to score points.
No, you're not trying to score points. That's another point you just got.
Yeah.
For real. Look at that. He's just scoring points.
I'm actually squirming for some reason.
Squirming. So has it ever been lower than a 5? Or what is the lowest it's ever been? And we're not just going to make this about therapy. What I'm trying to do is give listeners hope.
Yeah. Well, I think, we started at a 4 because we didn't know what we were doing.
Okay.
I remember a point in time while we lived in Buckley, so that's within the last 18 years where I went, I wonder if he ever was the man I thought he was, or if I made up this guy in my head, and now I've kind of grown into the strengths I saw in him, and now they're true. But to go, is he really who I thought he was ever? And then go, no, this is where he's strong. But to rethink it, 20 years in, to go, was I even realistic in the beginning? I think you got to start low. For me, anyway. Not because we were not. Because we were young and immature. A 4.5 is the best you can get when you're a rookie.
Gotcha. Tim, agree?
Yeah, I think so. I'm thinking, back to the beginning of marriage, and it was in my mind at that time, it was a 10. I was committed. I knew Heidi was really committed, but I was highly immature. We had very few responsibilities. We had a little bit of money, and it was like having this really cool partner to go be 18 for a while, even though we were quite a bit older than that. So that was a 10. And then when responsibilities and pain started to enter with no tools, I mean, for me, it probably got down to a 2, early on. And it wasn't so much Heidi not being compatible with me. It was me being able to grow enough to actually consider being married. Does that make sense? We had the rings and had done the ceremony and then the certificate. But now it's like, it's either going to end in a really tragic, fearful way for me, or I have to start treating this as a responsibility and a true commitment. And that was just incredibly frightening because it's like, I don't even know where to begin.
Right. And I know with life will bring all sorts of ups and downs, new responsibilities, changes. They can be physical. They can be because, babies start to arrive. Even Tim with your own addiction. And if you haven't heard Tim's Changed Life story, you can go back and listen to that. I'm sure that played a factor. Yeah. But 39 years later, here you sit, And what I heard is, hey, we started at a 4, maybe a 4.5. Tim's admitting there was a moment when it felt like a 2. And so there's this journey of up and down, but now we're sitting here looking at 8.5 and 9, and Tim is saying, listen, it was an 8.5, or the only reason it's an 8.5 is because I've got room to grow. And I don't believe, because I see you guys being brutally honest with each other, I don't think you're just saying that to score points.
Correct.
No. Yeah.
But now both of you being followers of Jesus, you've been through the school of hard knocks, you've survived a ton, children, now a grandchild, and with Christ as your guide, Christ as your center, Christ as your Lord and Savior, and His Word as your guide. That's what we want to look at today. We want to go to Ephesians chapter 5 because it's often misunderstood, often misinterpreted. We didn't plan a ton of this. I don't know what you're going to say. I've got an idea. But if you have a Bible, it might be cool to follow along, or if you're listening in your car or wherever, maybe later take some time to go back and study it, because it's in Paul's epistle to the Ephesians that typically we go to Scripture to kind of get this diagram for how the marriage relationship is supposed to break down, how each person, the husband and the wife, is to serve the other. But I think a problem many times, and I'm not just, I really want to get your thoughts, but I'm just trying to lay the groundwork here. Many times what we do as humans is we come to the Bible as a manual and say, okay, just what am I supposed to do? And then we peek over to the other person and say, well, you better be doing that, and I'm going to do this. But all I do is focus on what I'm doing, and then I focus on what you're doing, but I keep those separated. When in fact, as even before the podcast began, Heidi, you pointed out, all of Ephesians 5 is really about walking in love. In fact, the very first verse of Ephesians 5 says, therefore be imitators of God as beloved children. And in verse 2 it says, and walk in love as Christ loved us and gave Himself up for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. Now, I'm not going to read all of Ephesians 5, but that's how he sets up this whole complete thought. And just like we do with what's my part, what's her part, or what's my part and what's his part, we also chop up Scripture. Just give me straight to the verses where it says what I'm supposed to do to make everything work out. And so typically from there, we skip to verse 22, and we start the whole marriage conversation with something that can be highly misinterpreted and take people in a lot of different directions. And in verse 22, typically this is where the break is in our Bible, because some translator decided that's where I'm going to put the paragraph and that's where I'm going to put the heading. And right before that says wives and husbands, and then it begins by saying, wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. Now, we're not going to waste a lot of time. One of the reasons that we ask Heidi to be here is if we're going to talk about submission, we're going to have a woman in the room. And we're gonna battle with some of these thoughts. But before I turn it over, let's back up a second. And we pointed this out in church. A better place might be to start in verse 21. Actually, a better place might be to start all the way back in verse 1. But let's just reel it back to verse 15, where it says, "Look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time, because the days are evil." And then it goes on to say in verse 17, "Don't be foolish, understand the will of the Lord." In 18, it says, "Do not get drunk with wine, because that's debauchery, but be filled with the Spirit." That we're supposed to address one another in Scripture, psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, singing and making melody to the Lord. Verse 20 says we should be grateful people, giving thanks always and for everything to God the Father. And then here we get to verse 21. Submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. It's saying to be an imitator of God, to be a child of God, to be a Christian in any human relationship, we begin by submitting to God and to one another out of reverence for Christ. Then he turns the corner and goes into those familiar verses starting in verse 22, "Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. Now as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands." Let's pause right there. Let me pause right there, because we just dumped a whole lot of Scripture on people. But we're supposed to walk in love. We're supposed to be imitators of God. we're supposed to be wise and not foolish. We're supposed to submit to God and one another. And then as his first example, he talks about wives in relationship to their husband. Heidi, your thoughts?
So when Tim and I got married, we did things a bit out of order. We lived together before we were married. At one point, I wasn't sure his dad would perform the marriage ceremony because they found out our secret, which wasn't a secret. And then, so we're sitting down with his dad in my parents' backyard talking about what the ceremony is going to look like. And what do we want to say? What verses do we like and stuff? And so we're just kind of going through, and I'm like, and you know that submit word, you can just leave that out.
Really?
That's not going to happen.
You said that to the Reverend Warren Burgess?
I did.
God rest his soul.
Yes, I did. And he took it in stride. So this is who I was when we got married. Grew up with 3 brothers, fighting for my position in the family as the oldest, firstborn. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I can't be a patriarch.
Firstborn and a daughter.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So my second sibling, being a male, had privilege I didn't. Just naturally. And so my favorite bumper stickers at the time were "A woman without a man is like a fish without a bicycle."
Nice.
And a woman's place is in the House and Senate.
Wow.
And so there's where my quote comes from. Like, yeah, that word submit, that's not even going to happen. Just leave that out.
But you knew that was in there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you'd already read this part of the Bible at that point, or at least had heard someone quote it before.
Yeah.
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 But you weren't having it.
Nope.
There was no part of that.
No. And we, like our wedding invitations had scripture on them. Like our heart was to be biblical as best we could in that immature state.
Yeah, as long as it didn't interfere with fun.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And that's how I looked at that is, this isn't going to be that kind of marriage.
And Tim, what was your response, or were you aware of that, or?
I was sitting there with my dad, and I get there might have been a little fear and trembling because it was my dad, and I knew his stances very, very well, and I was impressed with my dad's maturity in reading the room and the situation. Like, this is his chance to meet. They had never met Heidi before. This is their
first impression.
Yeah.
Hey, that one part of the Bible.
Yeah.
I know you believe all the Bible, but that one part of the Bible, yeah. Not in here.
Yeah.
And not in my world.
Yeah. And, and I think I was proud of Heidi for saying it because I felt that way too, because we were looking at it completely wrong. It was our context of it was the old school from the 40s. Stay home, raise kids, have dinner ready, beer me, and sex me whenever, because I'm the guy. And it's like, no, that's not our relationship at all. We're very equal. And so it was my dad's response that was probably the most impacting to me, because it was very mild and very honoring. I think he knew what she meant. So that's how I felt about that.
So he didn't buck that. He was like,
No.
well, okay, that's the kind of marriage that you want.
Yeah.
So that was your impression then. I know you're quite the scholar. How has that changed? Or has it changed?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
It's changed. Slowly but surely. Well, if you've listened to Tim's Changed Life story, there was a point where we hit we're going to do this or we're not. But what we've been doing isn't working, and we have to do it different. When we moved back to Traverse City, we were attending Tim's dad's church. And by then, I was done with school. I was done with partying. I was ready to grow up, have a family, and I wanted to be like those people in that room. But I didn't know how to be like them. And when our lives hit that wall of Tim in treatment, they told me if I didn't change too, I would just choose another alcoholic to be with. And I knew in my heart of hearts that Tim was the man God chose for me. If I couldn't make it with Tim, the best choice from God, then how could I make it? So I started recovery for our relationship. And you had said earlier, it's like, give me the checkbox, give me the list. That's what I was looking for. Give me the list. Being an academic, give me the list to be a PT. Give me a list to be the athletic trainer. Give me a list to be the good mom, to fit in the church, to give me the list. And so when we got into treatment, there were 12 steps. There was a list.
There was a list.
There was a list. And it was in my head, but it wasn't in my heart.
Gotcha.
And I was in it just for our relationship, not for me.
So would it be safe to say that for you, in regards to submission, that the pendulum at some point swung from I don't want that at all to kind of believing, and again, we don't start a fight here, but kind of that old traditional, we're going to start with verse 22, that wives are submit to husbands, and completely leave out verse 21 where it says we're supposed to submit to one another out of reverence for Christ.
Right, because every time I thought I was doing a submit thing, bills wouldn't get paid, or, things wouldn't happen.
So you were taking it to an extreme, you were just going to be
Yeah.
beautiful and pregnant, and he was going to do everything because he's the leader.
I was still going to work and make money and probably be in charge. I was just going to direct.
You were going to direct from a different
I wasn't giving
position.
up control. I wasn't submitting to anybody. I wasn't submitting to Christ. I didn't know how. I couldn't find the place to submit. So it was a long period of time before it even felt safe to relinquish any responsibility to Tim. And that was on me. I think in early recovery, he got in it to win it for himself because he understood that, and I didn't. It took me probably 2 years to get to the point of going, no, I need to look at me and stop looking at we. We can only be better if we're both better.
Oh, you mean you can only control yourself?
Yeah.
You mean you can't control people, places, or things?
No. And
wow.
and if anybody could, it would have been me, because I was
You were
really
good at
good at
controlling.
control.
You were good at controlling.
Yes, if it was going to work, I could have made it work, and I couldn't. And at that point, then, you take the first 3 steps. I can't, he can. I think I'll let him, I'll let God. And at that point, then for me, the growth to leaning into submission was first submitting to Christ. And then understanding the big picture outcome is up to God. And I just need to do my part and let go. And so I went, that's the journey I've heard him talk about, where being with 4 other women, that was the time when I was home with my kids, where I went, I don't need my career to define me anymore. We have 4 beautiful children and a beautiful home, and we're never there. And taking that step from, at that point, I earned 2/3 of our income and all of our benefits and everything, and to say, that was a big measure of control to give up, but I wasn't giving it to Tim. I was trusting God to care for us and care for Tim. And so that's when that next real submission, I would say, happened in my life.
Gotcha. So you're submitting to God, you're submitting to the process, you're submitting to getting healthy yourself and not trying to control everything. In regards to submission, has your view changed? Like what is your view today of this passage right here? And I know there's more to Ephesians chapter 5. We haven't broken it down yet. But is that the wife's place? Just complete blind submission to her husband? And what in relationship is his actions towards her look like in regards to submission?
Okay.
Is it mutual, or am I just making that up in my mind?
Oh, it's mutual.
So describe it for us.
Yeah.
For the lady out there that's like, this is why I don't want to get married. This is why I don't trust men.
Yeah.
This is why I don't trust God or trust the church. This is why God's a sexist. Because you're basically saying, hey, listen, when you married Tim, you were a feminist. You had feminist ideals. You even had the bumper stickers. Now that you're this godly Titus 2 woman, and if you don't, I keep referencing Titus 2, go read Titus 2 for yourself. Yeah. Like, what's your view of this in marriage today?
So it's my view of this is that it's how to have a healthy marriage. It defines my part of the partnership. Because for me, it's I'm going to be prideful and I'm going to want to control. That's my sin. That's my biggest pitfall for sin. And so for me, in order to say that I'm not going to control, I need to let that control go. Now, in my relationship with Tim, it's safe to do that now. It wasn't safe in the beginning. It would have been irresponsible we tried. He wasn't ready. He wasn't skilled. And so at the point that God said, step back, and I listened, it doesn't mean he didn't say it before, and I listened, Tim was ready to start stepping in. And so it would have been foolish for me if I'd been coming from a godly perspective, which I wasn't. It would be foolish to step back too soon. Once upon a time, you gave Tim a book called Leading from the Second Chair. And I've never read the book, but the title told me everything.
I know books like that. It's like, oh, don't have to read that book.
Because
I still don't know if I like you, John, for making me read that. Because
I didn't make you. I said, hey, this might be helpful.
Yeah.
Somebody told me.
You checked in to make sure what chapter I was on.
Oh, yeah, whatever.
Oh,
yeah, come on.
Yeah, so I don't know if he did read it.
Yeah.
But for me, it's not saying I'm not going to lead. I'm not going to have strength, and I'm not going to have influence in our relationship. Submission means that I use my strength, I use my influence, I use my power to make the team better.
That's beautiful. Right there, I wish I could well, we have it recorded.
Yeah.
So I can go back and make a plaque out of that.
Yeah.
Make a plaque. So would you say, and sorry, I'm not trying to make this an interrogation because I want to go to Tim here in a second. Are there moments where you actually do submit to one another? So it's not just blind submission on Heidi's part.
No. Yeah, exactly. There are times when if it's a decision about the cars or whatever, he knows more about cars, but can we afford this decision for the cars? Then it's on me.
Gotcha.
And so, that's a practical submission, but there is in parenting. I'm not a man. I can't teach my sons how to be a man. And there are times that I've had to step back and go, oh my gosh, is what he's doing the right thing? Because this is really scary. This is thermoses clashing it out, and I'm a goblet. This scares me.
That's a beautiful picture.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you don't know what she's referencing, we've used that metaphor, I think, before, that women tend, not always, but tend to be more like a fine piece of china, a goblet that you might drink wine or hard cider out of. And men are more like a thermos. They can take a beating emotionally or with words, but women, it's a little bit more shattering.
Women wear words.
Yeah.
And that's, yes.
And that's to bring up the parenting example, I'm thinking right now, we had 4 daughters and then a son. And I was a pushover with all of the girls and still am. And then she would be just, really firm or stern or whatever. And then they always knew it was a safe place with dad, right? And then when my son, who may or may not be in this room, when he was just a little guy, and there were times, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, and I'd have to be firm with him. She would be like, hey, you're being too harsh. And I'm like, he's a man. I speak to him the way you speak to a man. Because there is a difference.
Yeah.
So Tim, from your perspective, you said you usually speak too much, but I want to hear your thoughts because I don't think you speak too much. How have you seen this play out of what a godly picture of submission looks like in your marriage? What works for you?
Boy, that's a really, really broad question. Pre-Jesus, there was this subtle change because previous I had always felt dumb in certain areas and feeling, having that feeling of, how come I don't have my act together? Not realizing who I really am. I mean, John, just be honest. If I ask you a question, would you put me in charge of anything that at church that requires a checklist?
No.
Why?
Because you don't do checklists.
Yeah, and it's not because I'm defiant.
No.
it doesn't work in my head.
And in our relationship, it took some years to figure that out. Tim, you're a great leader. When you speak, people listen. Why can't you just manage a checklist?
Yeah.
And it was like, finally, it was this light, no, that's not the value of leadership that Tim brings. It's not checklists. It's not managing stuff.
It's a different style, right?
Right.
So, I would naturally be defensive. I mean, I even felt a little bit when Heidi said, well, suddenly bills wouldn't be paid. You want to know what my first thought was? Some of the guys out there listening are going to understand how inept of an adult male I really am. I mean, that's the first feeling that comes. That's not how I really feel.
It's like a defensive feeling.
Boom. Yeah. So in this submission, Heidi went first. And I think that's, biblically that's incorrect. But I think I have backing for that. But she went first, and it was subtle and slow and kind. And the frustration she felt was never placed on me in an aggressive or a passive aggressive way. So there was no time where I felt shame or guilt or culpability if I didn't do something right. We would talk about something instead. And I don't know how long it took before I realized there was a change. And it's just like this change that I was feeling was, it was like beginning to get my man card, realizing I had the outward picture of owning a man card. Inwardly, I had a boy card. Do you understand?
Yep.
But the way she began to treat me, because it was honoring and with respect, and it wasn't blowing smoke at me. It wasn't fictitious or something ugly. It was something tender and beautiful. And suddenly I realized this is a reoccurring event. And I really love the way this feels, because I feel in a really odd way, even though I'm not doing everything supposedly that men are supposed to. I felt, help me with the word.
Compelled?
Well, yeah, I felt so honored in the situation, like I'm actually okay. I don't have to pretend anymore.
Yeah.
So it took this massive burden of, because, it's like if someone lies a lot and you have to spend all that energy to keep the lies straight, especially if you're more compulsive in lying. Well, sometimes I chose to live that way. Looking one way on the outside, being completely different at home. And suddenly not having to keep all of those lies straight was like freedom.
Yeah. So you don't have to be someone you're not.
Right.
Yeah.
See, I think what my wife and I know she would be fine with me saying this. We experienced something similarly in that we felt like leadership and submission, like the husband's supposed to lead and the wife's supposed to submit, was that I was supposed to pay the bills, I was supposed to keep the checking, I was supposed to take all the worry and all the anxiety, and she was just to make sure meals were on the table. Well, that lasted about 3 days. About 3 days, because the same thing, bills weren't going to be paid. She's the one that, I've joked now after being married for 32 years that if something happened to my wife, I'm not sure where my bank is.
Oh man, thank you for saying that, because I thought I was the only one. I had actually confessed to my daughter and said, if something were to happen to Mom, do you know where our banks are? And which ones they are?
Yeah, where's our little safe that has all the important papers like birth certificates and records and passports?
Yeah.
I'm not now. That doesn't make us less men. It means somewhere along the way we figured out what her strengths are, what my strengths are, and play to those strengths.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if as we go back to the scripture, so many people have tripped up with Ephesians because Paul chose. I mean, I think we've agreed the whole chapter, Ephesians 5, is about love. The whole chapter is about getting along in relationship with people.
Yes.
And then he uses an example from marriage. But he starts with the wife and submission. Now, I'm going to contend, and we'll get back to this here in a second, that the whole chapter is about submission. The whole instruction to husbands and wives is about submission.
Yes.
And not just because of verse 21. But why do you think, and that's a rhetorical, why do you think he starts with wives? It's almost like, and I'm putting words in Paul's mouth. So this is a paraphrase. It's almost like he's saying, especially you women, I want you to get this. don't forget to submit to your husbands. And I wonder, and I don't think I've ever processed this out loud before, but this is our podcast.
Yeah.
And if Britton was here, he'd tell us, we do whatever we want.
Yeah.
So as you were talking, Tim, I'm thinking all the way back to Genesis 3.
Yeah.
Where when God is giving out the curses, right, to the man, to the woman, to the snake, he says something interesting to the woman, and we're not going to break this all down. You can go back and listen to podcast 57. But he said to the woman, I will multiply your pain in childbearing, and pain you shall bring forth children. And that's not just the pain of literal giving birth. It's just painful to be a mom. It's painful because they grow up and they leave and they get married and
it doesn't stop being painful just because they leave the house.
Exactly, right? It's because they're goblets. And that's how God designed them, and that's a beautiful thing. But the second thing, he says, your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. Now, all three of us can remember when we went through the Ruth series, and we did that deep dive into what, when man and woman were first created, there wasn't this hierarchy, this leadership hierarchy. Yes, the man was made first, and he was made a leader by priority of being firstborn, the way you were. But God made a helpmate, an intimate ally for him. And in my mind, somehow in the garden, they were on equal footing.
Yeah.
Like they just had different roles, and nobody was ticked about who was made first and who wasn't, because he was made first, but she was more beautiful. So there. And she could make babies, and he was just more or less, a low-class participant, right? But I wonder if in Ephesians 5, if that's because this is her propensity, where it begins with part of the curse of being a woman is this insecurity, this fear that he's going to rule over me, and your desire, part of the curse is going to be to control. And I was thinking of that because of what you said.
Yeah.
Does that make any sense to
Yes.
you, or process that for me just a little bit?
Like in my version, the NET in Genesis, it says, for the curse, you will want to control your husband, but he will dominate you. And God spoke first to the snake, and then he spoke to the woman, and then he spoke to the man.
Right.
So I'm learning there are patterns in Hebrew communication. If Paul was a great Hebrew communicator, so he spoke first to mankind about sin, and then he speaks to the woman, and then he speaks to the man.
And here in the ESV, there's a study note here on that he shall rule over you. And I don't think I've ever read this note, but it said, these words from the Lord indicate that there will be an ongoing struggle between the woman and the man for leadership in the marriage relationship. The leadership role of the husband and the complementary relationship between husband and wife that were ordained by God before the fall have now been deeply damaged and distorted by sin. This especially takes the form of inordinate desire on the part of the wife and domineering rule on the part of the husband. So it's almost like he's saying, or the note is acknowledging that this here was right at the fall. And then what we're reading in Ephesians 5, this is in relationship to human beings after the fall. Okay, this is how we're going to get along. You, Tim, you and me with our curse as men, Heidi with your curse as a woman. And it's almost like he's saying, remember, there's this struggle that you're going to have for control more than he is. Right. Most men, it doesn't seem struggle for control. They either dominate or they're happy to just be passive and let her control, right? But finding the Jesus way in the middle to not dominate, but to be part of this mutual submission relationship.
Yeah.
That's what we're striving for.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Tim.
Well, no, I think you're really onto something here with that, because the implication, if we go back to submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. So if we take that in marriage context, the question is who goes first, right? And in my example, it was my wife. And by implication, when we go back to Genesis, that's exactly wrong, because Adam is the caretaker, right? He's given the garden and the rules and the responsibility of everything. And submitting is a responsibility, right? And it isn't, it needs to be looked at more as a sacrifice, I believe, right? In the submission aspect, and we just did a sermon on that. But if we go back, I think the reason Adam's second, in this one is just as important as why Eve is first and Adam is second, because the question that you can trick maybe somebody that's not real familiar with a garden story is have them read the story and then discuss it later. And the question that I always ask is, where was Adam?
Right. Yeah. And you're standing right there.
He was there with her. And they're like, oh, I don't know. Maybe he was picking fruit or something. No, he was right there with her. So that's that passive role. And that was that pride that he had to step back because he didn't want the responsibility, I think parallels men being second in the submission thing. The same reason. So we're taking that curse.
Right.
And it's matching perfectly with that.
Right. Heidi, you had something you want to throw in there as well.
Yeah, I think that if you look at, I didn't compare it in Genesis, but if you compare it in Ephesians, there's a couple sentences to the wife. The bulk of it is to the husband.
There you go. That's where we're going.
The bulk of it is to the husband. I just want to read to you what it says. I have the message here.
Go for it. Yeah.
So, out of respect for Christ, be courteously reverent to one another. Wives, understand and support your husbands in the way that shows your support for Christ. The husband will provide leadership to his wife the way Christ does to his church, not by domineering, but by cherishing. So just as the church submits to Christ as he exercises leadership, wives should likewise submit to their husbands. And I think in our relationship, that when I started appreciating the strengths that Tim did have, that's what submission looked like for me. Not continuing to point out, you could work on this, you could work on this, you could. One of the things I did poorly for us, because this is how I'm motivated, is I make a goal, and then when I set a new goal. But that was defeating for him. Because he's like, I'll never achieve.
He'll never arrive.
He'll never arrive. And that was the message he was getting from me, is that whatever you've done so far isn't good enough. You need to keep trying. And so when I switched to support him in the ways to show him where I saw his strengths, and I wasn't blowing smoke. There are some really incredibly wonderful things about him. They're not administrative, and that's okay, because that would be redundant in our relationship. And so for me, that's what submission looked like, is knowing he needed a different form of motivation than I did, and that I was failing to support him.
Would you also agree that you had to come to a place of not being the motivator? Because it isn't to try to motivate part of controlling?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, there was another thought that just popped into my head as you were describing submission, and it's the word acceptance.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that acceptance somehow is related. It's not a synonym for submission, but it's got to be related because you came to a place of submitting or accepting. This is who Tim is, and I'm going to choose to accept the things about Tim that I want to get behind, that I can admire, that these are his strengths, and I'm not gonna. It's similar to when we talk about. I don't remember. It was one of these 1,000,001 leadership books that someone threw at me, or I don't know, that I maybe read part of and then just said I don't have time for this. Not that all leadership books are bad. There's just very few really good ones. He
probably made me read it.
I probably made Tim read it, yeah. But
which means it hasn't been touched.
I remember one of them saying, so many people spend so much time and energy focusing where they're weak instead of focusing on their strengths.
Right.
Not that we, obviously if your weakness is some sort of, sin or addiction or something like that, it doesn't mean that we're okay with that. But it was basically saying in the relationship of leadership to focus on where your strength and then find people that can shore you up where you're weak. And I'm wondering if it's somehow related to that it's like, this is where Tim's really, really, really strong. This is where I'm not going to expect him to be someone he's not. And so in that sense, it feels like submission is similar to acceptance. Or at least related to it.
And acceptance is the answer to all my problems today. That's part of the
Oh, you're going
acceptance
to have
prayer
to.
for the 12 steps.
Well, we're not all in that little club, so you're going to have to flesh that out for us a little bit. Yeah.
I'll probably have to Google.
Well, you
it.
can just describe it
It's
for us.
so
Like what do you mean acceptance is the answer to my problems today?
Accepting that every person, place, thing, and situation is exactly where God needs them to be today.
Mm.
And so, and that's not settling for less. That's accepting that God has you where He wants you. God has Benji where He wants him, and Tim's where He wants him, and the rhino's where God wants. Well, that's inanimate, so it doesn't matter. But that then I'm not in control.
Right.
And so then you're good enough. If you're where God's put you, then you're where you're supposed to be.
So He's God. I'm not. He's in control.
Yes.
I'm not. I think I'll let him type. I probably
Yes.
butchered that.
No,
but isn't that
that's
how that goes?
perfect.
Yeah.
But it also, it puts into perspective that God has an individual journey with each of us, whether we know it or not, are trying to please Him or not, whether we've accepted Him or not. He still has plans. And our journeys aren't all at the exact same place.
Mm-hmm.
So we could be the same age, and I could be at the second part where God has me, and you could be at the 86, and Heidi's at 112, but we're still interacting.
Right.
And it's easy to get frustrated with a lower number in this example, right? Because they don't seem mature to see the consequences of their behavior or whatever. But God's working with them through that journey of their life, trying to draw them near, right?
Yeah.
So if you
that's so hard in marriage, though.
Well,
it's
yeah,
so hard because she's smarter than me. She's more spiritual than me. She gets it a lot quicker than I do. That's why women expect that I can read their minds.
Yeah.
Because they have mind reading capacity, and I don't have that yet.
Yeah, but when you get to a certain point in marriage and you're submitting to one another, and that would be Heidi understanding my lack of the ability to read what's going on. So as an example, a simple submission is Heidi coming home from work, having experienced today, whatever it was like, beginning to tell me, share the day with me. And I can sometimes sit there with a frantic look on my face because I'm trying to decide, do you want me to fix this or do you just want me to listen? And both are perfectly okay unless they're done in the wrong order. Well, she doesn't have a tick that tells me which one it is. So I have permission to ask, do you want me to fix or you want me to listen? And then she doesn't get upset expecting me to have read her mind. She just says, oh yeah, just listen, right? And sometimes she'll begin that same example saying, hey, just listen. I want to share something with you. And I'm off the hook. Well, if in a non-submissive way, we're going to continue to hold on to the I should know from the guy's side, and she's going to say he should know from her side, right? I think that's a little portion of submission is just simple, clear communication sometimes.
Mm-hmm. And like my example of that would be when we were first married and it was time to give gifts, birthday, Christmas, whatever. I honestly thought if he really loved me, he would know what I wanted. And I honestly thought that was true. And then
I was so screwed.
I was wicked because I wasn't grateful because he wasn't getting me the thing that I wanted. But then I learned, okay, so I'll hint throughout, the month before my birthday, I'll hint, and then he'll notice that didn't work either. And so then what I realized is that if I make a list and he picks, but the reason I hate to make a list is then these are things like I might want someday, but as soon as I put them down in a checklist,
he's going to do all of them.
What does a checklist girl need? Then I need those things. Then I become covetous.
Oh, wow.
And so it's like, I don't want to make a list because then I'm going to covet. But if I don't make a list, he's
not going to know and you're going to be disappointed.
And he got better at picking up hints. And I got better at not judging myself for coveting and being able to forgive myself and to get over it. And that's the 39-year journey.
And we have children who pay attention differently than I do. Mm-hmm. So often if it's birthday time, I can go to all four of my kids and go, hey, what do you think? And they will remember. Mm-hmm. And Heidi doesn't get offended that it wasn't me that remembered, but I did go buy it
Yeah.
Yeah.
or make it or whatever it is.
Yeah. So you found a new way to communicate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to go back to something,
Mhm.
because, for the checklist person or the person that is like, all right, I heard Heidi read it in the message, and I heard you allude to the fact that the majority from verse 21 to the end of chapter 5 is towards husbands. That was a real true statement, because most of the hangups, and you admitted your own hangup when you got married, is you knew this part that Paul's using an example. Now, wives, because of the curse, I want to remind you especially, don't try to control this guy, right? But then he goes on in verse 25. I just want to read it real quick. This is all the stuff that he says to Tim, all the stuff he says to John, all the stuff, God willing, he'll say to Benjamin if God brings him a woman someday, or to any man who's listening. He says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Now, I've got to stop right there, because to me, and I don't think I've ever expressed it this way, but that is submission, submission, submission. And so for me, for the woman that is like, God's a sexist, Christians are sexist, the Bible was written by men that are trying to keep women down, you missed the whole point, because you only read what was aimed at you, and you didn't read what was aimed at him. And you've probably suffered the experience of a fallen world where people hurt people, men and women hurt men and women. But right there he says, husband, so Tim, love Heidi the way Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. The giving up of yourself is submission. Is there a better definition? To give up my desire for this, my desire for that, my dream of this, the fact that I could sleep with the doors unlocked and the windows wide open and not be afraid for a second. But my wife wants me to do a last check and make sure that everything's locked up. That's submission. That's a little picture of submission. And we each have these little things that we must submit to one another, but we miss all the second half, because Christ submitted to his Father, he submitted to the cross, he submitted to death, a horrible death, because he loved the church so much. And this is what God is saying the picture of a husband towards his wife is. So all of a sudden, I'm sitting there thinking, you know what? It is 100% both ways, and it's going to be tough for both, because it isn't just about, we've talked up to this point about Heidi's, giving up control, and, this was hard because of all these things. But now the gun's aimed at Tim. Here's the other barrel, the double barrel, going, hey, buddy, you get to die. You get to lay yourself down for her, and that's what submission looks like. So he goes on, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church, gave himself up for her that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of the water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle. And there's a lot of theological speak in here that has to do not with marriage, but with Christ and the church, right? But then he says, verse 28, in the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes it and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is profound, and I am saying that it refers to Christ and the church. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. So what jumps out at you guys about that passage?
I just want to read it to you the way Eugene said it. Husbands, go all out in your love for your wives, exactly as Christ did for the church, a love marked by giving, not getting. Christ's love makes the church whole. His words evoke her beauty. Everything he does and says is designed to bring out the best in her, dressing her in dazzling white silk and radiant holiness, and that is how husbands ought to love their wives. And they're really doing themselves a favor, since they're already one in marriage. That's how honoring is that, to be receiving of that my actions are designed to bring out the best in him, and his actions are to bring out the best in me. And that's just beautiful.
And I'm not putting a capstone on this, but when I think of how you just worded that, for you to bring out the best in Tim,
Mm-hmm.
I've seen you do that.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen you do that. And to see how Tim brings out the best in Heidi, I've seen you do that too.
Mm-hmm.
And that's 39 years perfect that we're running on.
Yeah.
I'm assuming it wasn't always
No.
that way. But this one flesh of bringing about the best in one another, this is how to live in a Christian marriage in a fallen world when we're both in process.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, to use Tim's analogies, when we're at different numbers and different places and God's got us on a different journey, but we're still going to interact and live with one another. Tim, what do you think of when you hear the words, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her?
Impossible was the first thing I thought way back in the day. Because even as a pagan, I knew the story, and to emulate Christ completely was impossible for me, and for a lot of reasons. But it was like a boy suddenly finding himself in the adult world, and nobody had ever taught me what that meant. Nobody had ever really showed me. So there wasn't like conversation in my family of like, son, this is when I'm submitting to your mother. And let me explain this. It never happened. I think that'd be priceless to have those conversations with your kids as they grow.
But it would also be a little stilted. It would be a little like, is this real? I
Yeah.
mean, and there's no context when you're like 10,
right, but
14.
I think if it's a common language, just like the dysfunction that we do share with our young kids all the way until they leave the house, and a lot of times after, it becomes a narrative in their life, and it becomes a way to respond. And so we start teaching them that, and actually naming it would be much healthier, in a way. So I'm not talking about, homeschooling, and we're just this closed little covenant group of people. I'm just talking about common language, just good talking points. But, the husbands love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up. It's all the way to death. And there was that feeling like, would I take a bullet for Heidi? Of course I would. And I felt that was it in the beginning. What I realized is that, number one, that probably is never going to happen. And I don't know if I'm aware enough to be quick enough and have quick enough twitch muscles to actually jump on front and get the bullet. So it's easy to say yes to that. What it meant was the daily stuff.
Right.
And that was the really hard part. And it felt like I didn't have a choice in my reactions to situations. But I did find when I changed the word reaction to response that I did have a choice. Now I have a choice to die and give something up, right? So, you could say the big example would be drugs and alcohol. Yeah, I did that for me.
Yeah.
The benefits later of staying sober, I did it for us because the two become one. And that I've never really thought about it quite as it. I often say you're supposed to love your wife like you love your own body, and it sounds a little narcissistic, but in that the original aspect of that is. It's almost like survival mechanism. And I use this example all the time. If, John, you didn't know how to swim and we're by a really deep pool and I push you all the way to the middle, what are you going to do?
I'm going to panic.
You're going to try to swim.
Yeah.
Why? Because we have a survival instinct, because we love our bodies, right? It's innate. God built us that way. Not to be prideful and, have to have all the muscles. All the muscles are bad. You know what I mean? So it isn't about that aspect. It's about, this body that you have now includes this other human. And you're not surviving just for yourself. You're surviving for us.
Yeah.
And when we have the other one, I often, today it feels like the word I use is advocate. Heidi's my advocate in the best possible way. Being an advocate doesn't mean she just praises me, right? John, I remember, Darcy will kill me for this, but she was telling me about traveling with you. and all of these people come up after listening to you speak, and they'd go, "Do you know? So you're married to Johnny V?" And she was getting so tired of that, and she looked at us, a safe place, Heidi and I, in semi-disgust just with that question.
Yeah.
And she started clapping her hands.
Yeah.
Going,
she goes, every day he comes home, I go, Johnny V, Johnny V,
Johnny V.
That was sarcasm, people. She's never done that in her life.
Yes. And then she
although the narcissist in me wishes she would.
I know. Because she rolled her eyes really.
Yeah,
you know, an advocate.
That's why God gave her to me.
Yeah.
Just to keep feet right on the ground.
And an advocate also points out what you do wrong.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So if
it's
I'm
your BS meter.
Yeah, all the way through. And if an advocate is in sports is going, hey, stop eating Twinkies, that's killing your workout, they're still your advocate. Why would they even bother saying it? And that's really beautiful. So this, loving my wives and loving my wife and giving myself up for her means it's these daily little things. And then if I make a mistake and I don't do it, it's almost always verbal.
Right.
And it's almost always wounding. Then in comes to my head, women wear words. That's what Heidi taught me. Women wear words.
Yeah.
So some of the worst abuse I've seen in marriages is verbal abuse from a husband to a woman using horrific words. That person hasn't died to themselves yet.
Right.
They're not sacrificing. Then it's going ahead and making the amend, going back and saying, Heidi, that was wrong. I was wrong. And not saying but or because. I just say, I was wrong. The message I gave you hurt you. The message I really want you to have is this. I'm so glad you're in my life. You're so important. You being my advocate is the most wonderful thing on the planet. When I come home from preaching and you experience this in a similar way, I think. But, like this last weekend was pretty intense. And, I get home and my wife assures me, you're still a good person. You're doing what God wants you to do. Because I'm filled with questions. It's like, God, I tried to follow what you said, but that was really rough.
Right.
And it doesn't matter what the sermon's about necessarily. If the sermon's pointing to Jesus, I can still feel that way. And to have this reassurance, and she doesn't give it like with a rolling of your eyes. Like, I already told you, 2 months ago. It's like, no, you need this right now.
That little encouragement.
I get to accept it, a nice hug, I love you, you're important, God still loves you, those types of things.
Yeah.
That's a priceless experience to have, and it doesn't work if it's not from the heart of both.
Right. And if we can go back to something here just a second.
Go for it.
If you're listening to this isn't something that you should be pointing at your wife going, see, you need to be more like Heidi.
Yeah, please don't ever do that.
Or see, you need to recognize when I do that like Tim, because comparison
Kills.
it kills. It's the thief of joy. And it's going to look different and different. And I struggle with that. I have struggled with that. I'm learning. I'm on this journey of acceptance. Because we all get these images of what a marriage is supposed to be like by the impossible images that we see in television or in movies. Look, it's not going to be the Brady Bunch. It's not that I want a marriage like the Brady Bunch. That's just the first thing that came to mind.
Yeah,
right?
That's kind of creepy, but okay.
Yeah, it's not going to be Ma and Pa Ingalls, right?
Okay, that's better.
Yeah, that's better, I guess, whatever. Or, whatever you saw in the movies or whatever you see in other people, it's that one flesh is a big deal. This woman that I married is now the standard of beauty for me. This is the standard of womanhood, of wifehood, the whole deal, and vice versa. And that whole one flesh thing can be a game changer for us. As I'm listening, it seems like one of the enemies of marriage, one of the pitfalls, one of the dangers is control. Going both ways.
Right.
I remember years ago, we heard a pastor describe it this way, and I still use it. I used it in a meeting I had with Britton and Hope. It seems to me there's three kinds of marriages. There's the winner-loser, there's the 50-50, or there's the side-by-side. And only one of the three is a good kind of relationship. Only one of the three is a good kind of marriage. The winner-loser is there's somebody in the marriage that is the winner, that controls, that dominates. And it could be the man, it could be the woman. It could be the man, and it's not always their personality. It's not always who talks the most. but a winner-loser. There's someone who's always winning. It's all about him or her desires, her needs, her wants, and the other person is just glad to be there. They're just happy to, they're happy to be a loser and just let the other person win because they get to stay married, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you get all these bright-eyed, bushy-tailed people who's like, no, our marriage is going to be 50-50. And I've had tons of people sit in marriage counseling with me. Yeah, we have a 50-50 relationship. We're going to have a 50-50 marriage. And of course, we know that blows up in your face because 50-50, what happens when one person can't pull their fair share? What happens when it becomes 60-40 or 75-25 and you're over here going, hey, I had the kids last weekend. It's your turn. That goes south as well. What we're looking for is instead of control, we're looking for this side by side. And that's a hard place to get to. And then the other thing that I just heard in this last bit from both of you is that the enemy of marriage is selfishness. It's selfishness. So this section is all about Christ giving himself up for the church, and that's how husbands are supposed to love their wives. Well, that's the opposite of selfishness.
Yeah.
How many men, we're going to pick on men because we're the tab and we can, resent her because I can't have my toys because she wants this. Or I can't, I can't get the motorcycle or the bigger truck, or I've got to go do the family thing, or, I've got to go to the kids. Oh, it's what she wants. And it's resent, but it's really all about him. He wants his comfort. He wants to do what he wants. Whatever it looks like, it's about his hobby. It's about his friends. It's about his lifestyle. It's about him all the way. And women can be that way too.
Oh, yeah.
But it seems like those are the two enemies, control and selfishness. Heidi, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's so if you go back to what Christ sacrificed, we started kind of with his ministry. He sacrificed to be born a human being. I mean, he sacrificed to be a toddler, to get potty trained, he sacrificed his whole life, and that take a bullet for, that's the easy thing. That's the easiest thing. It's the dying to yourself every day that is submission, and that is the sacrifice. I think for me, I can see myself in every one of those styles of marriage that you described. As we've been talking, I was thinking, there was a long time I just wanted to win in our marriage.
Right.
And I think I probably started with the 50-50 and all of a sudden went, I think it's 90-10 and I'm tired.
So I'm just going to take the whole 100. I'm just going to win. So it started out as 50-50. Then you decided I just need to win this thing.
Well, no, I'm doing 90% of it and I don't want to. He's carrying 10 and I can't do this anymore. How do I get out of this? And then when I got in recovery, it's like, oh, here's a set of rules I can win at. Because we talk about character defects. We learn all these things and I get to point them out. I use this new thing about feelings and stuff as a weapon instead of as something to grow. And so then moving from that weaponizing of that relationships to going side by side. Well, who had to be willing to go side by side first? I had to be willing. In our relationship, it worked. But there were so many ways that he led. Or sometimes when he tells his story and he minimizes who he is and where he's at, it breaks my heart. Because there were so many ways that he led that he doesn't give himself credit for. So your numbers are not 44. Your numbers are 120, but they're in a different field than mine are.
That's right. Well, I'd also like to say that you said 90-10. It was actually 89-11 in the percentage. So
make it that small correction.
I'm standing up for myself.
That small correction. There's a mutual friend we have named Joe Kelly, and shout out. We would like to get Joe on this podcast. We have to work it out. Although I think Britton really, really wants to be here when he's here, but I may pull a fast one. But Joe's a counselor. He's a therapist and loves the Lord and has loved our staff well, both individually offering his wisdom and collectively There's something he said years ago about marriage that was very helpful for me and my wife, because we were in this, we were struggling to let the other person be the other person and be on their own journey. This idea of not being selfish, but accepting, and also not trying to control, and also not trying to get the other person to fulfill all our needs.
Right.
That's another place, and I don't know how this all relates here, but I won't speak for her, I'll speak for me. If she didn't respond the way I wanted her to respond, I could build up a really big wall of resentment, because somehow I wanted her to be my functional Christ, my Savior. Hey, fill this this God-shaped void that's in me with your words or your comfort, or tell me I'm great, or to be that Johnny B, be my number one cheerleader, and get all twisted that way. And the example that he used was like a healthy marriage, because he was trying to explain acceptance and detachment, which is, we don't have to dive into that right now. But he said a healthy marriage is like two people swimming together, like swimming across a lake. Right when you get to the deep, and we're talking about like a narrow little pond lake, like Gitchigumi, where it could actually, in our fit days, you could actually make it, right? When you're actually in the deep part, he said the problem is you two are hanging on to each other. And in hanging on to each other, neither of you can really swim, and you're going to drown each other. And I think a lot of marriages do that. Someone's grasping for control, someone's grasping to hang on, someone's grasping in selfishness to themselves, and they're both sinking. And this picture that he gave us was, no, both of you just focus on you, and I'm doing this because you just focus on swimming. And in this marriage, you've chosen to swim side by side. And so I can be swimming and look over and go, hey, we swimming together? Yeah, we're still together. Hey, you doing good over there? I'm doing good over here. And the whole point was to focus on you and how you're doing your part of Ephesians 5. Let her do her part of Ephesians 5. You're not judging her. You're not giving grades or marks on her. She's not giving grades or marks on you. You're accepting what you get, and you've chosen to go side by side through life together. And this is that side by side marriage picture.
Yeah.
Is there a better metaphor for you, or do you find that's true, or where's the holes in that argument?
No, I think that that's a beautiful metaphor. I'm going to think about that a lot. But what stuck out to me in that was, for me, the transition. I mean, we've heard a lot of good teaching on, Tim is a wonderful husband. He's a lousy God, right? So if he is,
and vice versa,
exactly, I will be a terrible God for him. But when someone told me, what if marriage isn't to make you happy, but it's to make you holy? It's like, oh crap, that just raised the bar, because then it's between me and God, being the person he wants me to be in my relationship, rather than checking in with Tim going, am I good enough? Right? Well, he seems happy. He's well fed. The house is clean enough. We're good. No. My responsibility is to be who God calls me to be, to help him be the best he can be, right? Not control him, not fix him, not change him, but accept and support. And that really changed that's when it put a name for me on how my focus shifted, now we will have a happier marriage if we both have that vision. But that's a desire, not my expectation, because my commitment's to God, and the reward will come from him. I have to come from him.
That's a hard thing to do, is because you
Yeah.
want all that. You want all the feel goods to come from your spouse, instead of where it should come from is from God. And so when you're self-contained in knowing who you are and who where your identity comes from, it comes from Christ. You become a much more lovable person and a much more agreeable wife, and vice versa. Same thing with you. Tim, you look like you're dying to say something. You want to insert something there?
Yeah, I do. When you're the recipient of that graceful submission like that, it's really, really okay to say thank you. it's really okay to point that out to the other person in a loving, honest way. It's like coaching. If you have a soccer player who could be really brilliant, but they keep making the same thing, and you work with them, and finally they do it in a game,
you got to tell them.
You tell them, and if you don't, they're not going to know. So communication is key. I want to go back to the guys a little bit, but this also works for women. When we're using the weapons of, I want my toys, I've got, or my time, I want to go hunting more, I want to go fishing more, but she has these needs. In my mind, that's like calling your wife the old lady. And it puts me immediately, my hairs go up, and I wish I was big like Britain.
Because you want to thump somebody.
Because I want to thump somebody, and then, I rein that in. And I've thought about that a fair amount, is why do I have this reaction? What is that? And it isn't just justice that I'm looking for. Number one, men, as this has already been said in this podcast, women wear words. And some of the viciousness that can come out that don't sound like vicious words have an implication that is soul-crushing. But the primary thing that I see in that is I'm not looking at somebody who's worshiping anything but idols at that point. And when I see a woman who has made a lot of her own choices and is in a bad fix, and without a successful marriage, and I'm not saying the guy isn't culpable, but I watch her and I often see her worshiping idols. And it's the idol of anxiousness. It's the idol of possessions, of comfort, of
how do you look like that marriage?
I just want to be, safe and happy. And those are all idols, is what they really are. They're not physical necessarily, but that's who we worship. And just like I've said in too many sermons, the idol of drugs and alcohol, that God with a little g, is a merciless God. And he's never satisfied, and he's never pleased, and he's always asking for more. And you will never arrive. And that's the same thing with all those other things. And so that's where the case of, does your identity come from Christ? Right? And so what we're seeing is Christ's identity in this bit of scripture. And I believe it starts out in verse 1 and 2 as, if you really want to have a successful marriage, it says, therefore be imitators of God. That's us, his beloved children. And he says, and walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us. And this is what Christ and us end up becoming. If we do that, our marriage, which is supposed to be a light on a hill, it's a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. And we've screwed up the word sacrifice so much, the way we've screwed up submission so much, that it falls in our negative category of, I don't want to sacrifice, I don't want to submit. Because what about me, right?
Right.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, so what I hear you saying is really the way you relate to Heidi is worship.
Bingo.
You're worshiping God in how you choose to respond and the way Heidi chooses to interact with you. That's your spiritual act of worship, Romans chapter 12.
Exactly. Right. And nowhere does it implicate I worship Heidi or Heidi worships me or Darcy and John worship each other. Never is that the case.
Right.
It's our living sacrifice, and how we, even when we do it and screw up, but then we repair it. Right. That's an offering to God, is that repair, because what we're doing is mimicking Christ's forgiveness then.
So there's a sermon in the Blood, Sweat, and Tears series that it'll actually, I think when this podcast comes out, it'll have been last weekend. And I asked for Darcy's help, and I wanted to use an example from marriage and poor communication. And this is, to me, it's hilarious, because the way I asked her, I said, listen, you have a memory like an elephant, and I have a long line of sins. Can you give me an example where I really screwed up? And she said, well, I have one, but remember, you laughed about this too. Like she wanted to be, and she just nailed it. And what made me think about it, Tim, is when you were saying that women wear the words, right? And so we were having a discussion. It wasn't a full-blown fight, but there were some resentments that were coming out both ways, and and she hadn't responded in a way that I wanted her to, and I hadn't responded in a way that she wanted me to, and I found myself saying these words, and I'll try to get it right as I recall them, is I was pointing out her problem. And the problem was that she never apologized for anything. You never apologize for anything. I, on the other hand, I apologize sometimes even when I don't even mean it.
Uh-oh.
And this was a low IQ moment.
And this was a low IQ moment because no matter how many times I've apologized since then, including for saying those words, she's always doubting, does he ever even, has he ever meant an apology? You know, by my own sword have I fallen on it, right? And so, yeah. So this little passage ends with, you know, he wraps it up by saying, this mystery is profound. I'm saying that it refers to Christ and the church. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. And so it's not saying that women shouldn't love their husbands and only respect them. And it doesn't say that husbands shouldn't respect their wives, but only cherish them. But let's speak to that, this whole idea of husbands, don't forget to love your wives or to cherish. And wives, don't forget to respect your husbands. Why do you think he ended with love and respect?
So someone could write a book.
Oh, someone did. So someone could write a book. Yeah,
I'm going to be sorry,
Yeah,
but that's
yeah.
the very first thought that came into my head. Not that exact
So
statement.
somebody
but
stole a book title.
Yeah,
right
that
out
was
of-
somebody's book title, and
Yeah.
you know, it's an okay book. I guess it's
It's
really
okay.
long and repetitive, and
It's
I wouldn't
okay, yeah.
recommend it
Yeah.
for any. No, never mind.
Especially if you're a box checker. No, I mean, listen,
Yeah.
we're not going to be afraid to say that on the Tab podcast.
Okay.
I'm sure for some people that was a helpful book, but for the most part, take it with a grain and or barrel of salt.
Yep.
Because you can get in a lot of trouble. And I don't even, hey, this is our podcast. I'm just going to say this for the first time publicly right now. The entire sex part of that book, tear it right out and don't read it.
Okay.
It isn't worth your time. In fact,
Please.
most of the sex parts of Christian marriage books, you can tear them right out.
Oh.
And that's probably a totally different podcast that is rated PG-13
That's right.
or
And-
R.
yeah.
But yeah, because we get in a huge, in fact, I'm going off on a rant.
Okay.
Our mutual friends, it'll be a short one. What did he say to us, Joe Kelly, after a lifetime of, or at least a half a lifetime of counseling? He said most abusers, spiritual, physical, and sexual abusers, could line up Bible verses to use to justify their actions. That sent a chill down my spine.
Yeah.
When we don't understand or we use scripture to justify our own wickedness. And by the way, I'm not saying that the sex chapter in Love and Respect is, about abuse. That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'm saying we get a twisted picture of sexuality when it's based on the wife submitting to the husband's needs, and all he's supposed to do is be the food provider, and she's supposed to be the sex provider. And that needs to be said. That's messed up. It's a longer podcast when I have smarter people in the room like my wife.
Yeah, it's also not at all congruent with the two become one.
Exactly.
Right.
We're now one.
Or the husband loving his wife as he loves his own
Yeah.
body, right?
So your question then, at
Yeah,
the
has to do
beginning
with
was,
love and respect.
Yeah,
Sorry.
with each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. That's a bit of practical wisdom, is what I look
Good.
at. It seems to be something that you might read in Proverbs, because men get the computer screen in our head. We can only have one open at a time, and sometimes they're open on the battle that we're in glory for us, because that's how we're built, or it's on the daily job, or it's on the hunting trip, or it's and we only have one screen open, and we get really excited, and then we're coming back home, and it's really hard to open that other screen. And I think what it's saying to me is there are times where that's going to be your primary screen, and there's other times where it's going to be the minimized screen. That is the one that will always be open no matter what situation you're in. So if we're working, it's to show this love to our wife. If we're playing, it's so that we can be better people when we come home and show that love to our wife. In a perfect person, I can't do all of that. But that's the implication that I see in there. And God knows our men after the fall have struggled forever for respect that we lost appropriately so in a garden. And that's going to be a continual thing. And a lot of guys feel, and here's when I see it at its brightest, most ugly, vivid, is when a woman has left a man and it's been a terrible relationship and he's made no work towards the effort. And she's moved out. Is going to file for divorce, and he's and he's making all of these changes, and it's going to all be better. And why doesn't she see it? And I'll say, because you've only been doing it for 2 weeks.
Right.
Right? That's all you've been doing it for. And they'll go, but doesn't she know who I am? And what they're honestly confessing at that point. There's this beautiful confession that's happening. And what they're saying is, doesn't she know who I could be? Right? And that's why we say never marry potential.
Yeah,
right?
don't marry potential.
Don't marry potential. And so he feels it isn't the loss of love, it's the loss of respect is what he feels in that situation.
And the interesting thing is for every man, because what we inherited from our first father, Adam, was an initial loss of respect in the garden where we didn't take responsibility. We didn't step into the role, the protector role, the one that God first gave the command to. He stood by and watched that passive role. And because I talk to men all the time, and if men are honest, their deepest fear is, am I good enough? Am I adequate enough? And it doesn't matter what it's in. If he can build his own house, run down a deer, kill him with his bare hands and gut him with his teeth, he then feels inadequate when it comes to books and learning in the Bible. If he knows the Bible and preaches every week, deep down he feels inadequate because he can't change the oil in his car, and she's going to find out that he's not as brave and tough as he thought he was. So for men, it's that feeling of inadequacy some way. That's why men are always chasing the blessing of their father. My dad never said I was good enough. My dad, it was never, he never said I love you. My dad never hugged me. Man's chasing the respect. Mm-hmm. On the flip side, what's a woman chasing? Heidi, you're the woman in the room. You speak to this.
Well, relationship, and that a good relationship is a loving relationship, something that women nurture and cherish more easily than men. We're hormonally, neuroscientifically designed to love and nurture and give life. And so as you give, you want. That's what you want to receive.
That's right. And Eve, I'm thinking, how, never thought of this before. And I know I say that a lot. It's because I'm an out loud processor. So unless I'm processing with somebody, it's genuinely the first time I thought, how frightened was she the moment her eyes were opened and she realized she was naked and ashamed. Mm-hmm. She was separated from God and separated from the one other being on the planet that was like her. Mm-hmm. And for Adam, he must have been just as frightened. Mm-hmm. He was separate. How, not just full of shame, but full of fear. When it says they were hiding, they weren't just hiding because they didn't want to be seen. It was straight fear. And so for the man, it's the fear that I'll never be respected. For the woman, it's the fear that I can never be loved in this type of a relationship again. And we're both looking to the other. And if it's outside of Christ, it's always going to fail, right?
Yeah. And so play that a little further. The perfect love, the perfect respect had come from God. And now we're separated from him and we're stuck with each other who aren't ever going to be perfect at that love and respect. But we're going to keep looking to each other because we've got that separation. That's a very isolating picture,
right,
to see yourself in that. Yeah.
So is it fixable?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Marriage is fixable.
Yeah. Yes.
So here's a sorry, you started to share something.
Well, just if you in my note for that, where the wife is supposed to respect her husband, it's the same Greek word that's used as reverence in verse 21.
So you have
So-
reverence for Tim?
Yeah. This, yeah. I do.
Tim, that must be nice.
It's awesome.
What does reverence look like, or respect? I mean, you just walking 3 feet behind him going, "Oh, Tim, great one."
I
What
did
did
that
it-
this
what
morning
did
and
I
he
say?
yelled at me.
We were at the general store and we're walking back to pick up a car at the service station, and we're walking through, and all of a sudden she's 3 feet behind me. And I'm like, "What
Well, it
are
was
you?"
narrow. There was
And I'm like, "What are you doing? Get up here! I don't want people to think I'm some Muslim guy making you walk 3 steps behind me. Good grief!" But it was still
3
all
steps
about.
behind with your
Yeah.
head.
It was all
covered.
about me, though.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
all about you.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And so, yeah. So yes, I do. I guess it goes back to looking at his strengths and appreciating the strengths and
Good.
respecting what he brings.
Could
The
you take a
relation-
moment and list all of my strengths, please?
Yeah.
Tim, we will not use this.
Biceps
We will
and
not use this
quads.
podcast for your inner narcissist. I'm sorry.
Oh, it was therapy. but
Oh, it's
okay.
therapy. Okay. So as we're bringing this, let's bring this home. So I don't get in trouble with Britton, because this is really, yeah. What would you say, just questions that may or may not be related. Heidi, what would you say to the woman out there who resents besides everything we said on the podcast, but just the short boom, this is for you, for the woman who resents what the Bible has to say because she doesn't understand, for the feminist, for the young Heidi that's listening, that's like, well, that's never going to work. I got to change him. I got to control him, or I don't want anything to do with him and his God because of this whole S word, the submission thing. What would you say to her?
Then look at the love words. Look at those first. Love is what we seek. Love is our primary language. Look at the love words, and because there's a lot more of those. And when you understand how Christ loves you, then it's like it says in verse 1, or in the first part, that's what we're supposed to do, is observe how Christ loved us, and then love people like that.
Good.
Including the one that God chose uniquely for you.
So Tim, for the dude that's listening who's like, you know what, marriage is about making me happy. This woman is going to, how did you say it? She's going to beer me when I say beer me, sex me when I say sex me. And by the way, if we're using offensive language with you, then our podcast and our church is probably not for you.
Probably not.
Yeah. What would you say to that guy who thinks it's all about her respecting him, giving him what he wants, submitting to him blindly, and that he's finally scored his dream? Like, what would you say to that guy who's got that?
It would depend on the context of the conversation. If somebody came to me and said, in a semi-humble way, hey, I have seen a couple marriages around church that I really admire, and yours might be one of them. What is it? How'd you get there? I'm going to be really serious. The other ones, I'm as hard as it is, I'm not going to say a word because I would be inserting something that an answer to a question they're not asking. But if somebody's really asking that question, I'm going to say that understanding the true nature of Jesus, and the only way you can really understand that is to read his stories and his words and his deeds, and placing myself at the center of that mix of what if I was one of the disciples? What if I was one of the Pharisees? What if I was born 2,000 years later, and this still represents his opinion about me?
Oh, you mean the Bible doesn't change?
Right. It would be if that's how God, the creator of the universe, actually feels about me, and he calls my wife his daughter. What do you think his response is going to be if you abuse that relationship? Because guys are a little more thermosy. I wouldn't say go look at all the love things. I think that was really beautiful, Heidi, for you to say that. But for women, and there are some guys that are ready for that too. I'm not trying to be sexist, but just I'm a realist. Boys are different than girls, and in that psyche, I'm going to challenge them, and it's actually going to be in a way, if they perceive it correctly, it's going to challenge their manhood. Are you really a card-carrying member, or are you, like I was for a very long time, a card-carrying member of the boy club?
No, that's good, because, and again, this isn't the exact topic, but you've touched on something else that I think is a poison for relationships. It's a poison for marriages right now. Is culture more and more does not want to admit that boys and girls are different. I'm not making a political statement. I'm saying when we don't view the differences in our base character, just the way we're wired, then we come to marriage and we're expecting the other person to respond the way that I would. So I would say to dudes, why do you want her to respond like a dude? You're a dude. And if you didn't marry a dude, you don't want a dude response from the woman you married, and vice versa. You didn't marry a woman, ma'am. Why do you want him to respond like a woman? Thank God she's not like me. And thank God that I'm not like her, right? And I'm thinking right now, we both have grandchildren, and mine is a granddaughter. And little Avie just turned 1. And when she was about, I want to say 11 months, Isabel got her a baby doll. And actually, it was her baby doll. And it's just this tiny, it's thrashed. I mean, she actually had to get her a new one because it looked like she was carrying a dead animal around. Because, I mean, it's like a 24, I was old when we got it. And so Avie is carrying this little baby doll around, and she is cuddling it and putting her head on it. She's nurturing it. And I remember the first time that I saw her do it, my daughter, my 25-year-old daughter, looks at me and goes, I didn't teach her to do that. She goes, she did that on her own because that's what I do to her. She saw that in the differences. I'm also thinking when my son was really little, and once, I won't go into the whole story, but he had whacked his sister with a Nerf sword, and I'd warned him 3 times to stop hitting because his sister was crying. It was a sister right above him, and he was just watching a movie, and he'd hit her with a sword. Well, finally, exasperated, I came stomping in, took that Nerf sword out of his hand, spun him around, and whacked him right on the pull-up with the flat part of the Nerf sword. So don't get me in trouble. He had a padding, and it was a flat, and it was Nerf, and I was like, boom, and I looked at him, I was like, now it's mine. And his little lip, he's going to kill me. He's right over there. But his little lip started to quiver, and that kid went running out of the room and slammed the door to his bedroom. And I'm pulling was I too harsh? Should I have been more like his, and I was just about to go in and say, I'm sorry for my temper and for responding to a man the way a man should respond. That little, came out the room with another sword and was like, hi-ya. He was like, on guard, let's fight. And he was ready to, and we had the greatest sword fight. I don't even know if he remembers that. But there is a difference. There's a difference that there's a book that a guy wrote about how, for men, that there's a battle to fight. And I want to say that the battle to fight is not against your wife. It's with her side by side, and whatever mission or calling or purpose and plan that God has for you, she's your intimate ally. For the woman, you're not called to fight this battle with him for control, is what I'm hearing. It's no, we have a purpose and plan and a mission together, whatever that's going to look like. Her with all the beauty and charm and wisdom and spiritual and physical, emotional strength that she has, him bringing the same thing to the table. And you'd use the word team, which I think is huge. And bringing both feminine and masculine characteristics to that team is what makes it strong.
Yeah, so, and both made in the image of God.
Yes.
So it makes a stronger picture of God, right?
And God has both masculine and feminine characteristics.
Yeah.
That's just the truth.
I know you want to wrap this up.
No, we're fine.
But Britain's away. And it's not the cats will play. Let's just be honest. His bosses are at play. So
everyone here is Britton's boss.
I know it. So
except Benjamin.
Well, no, actually, Benjamin has.
He's the executive producer.
He has the off mic.
This is true.
So that could happen really quick. When you look culturally around the world, so archaeologically, and they do the sociological studies through the archaeology. There's a number of things that are very common amongst all humans, and one of them is every group has a god. They have not found one yet that doesn't worship. So that's very intriguing to me.
Yeah.
That concept. So there might be something innate there. In every culture, the girls play some type of house, whether it's with inanimate objects or with each other. They'll often be seen, if it's a culture that had some type of a teaching, more of like a school type of a setting. And all boys play war. Everywhere. Every single society has the exact same thing. There's no exception. So history can just be this unbelievable teacher, for those of us who choose to believe the Bible. And that's how God wired us. And I love how, God says both are necessary to be whole in a marriage. So we're not redundant with each other.
You can either fight it or you can celebrate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, using those skills that God innately gave us to battle our spouse is so foreign to the concept of loving your own body, right? Since the two become one. You're warring against your own body at that point. And there's such a massive battle to fight out in the world. And it doesn't have to be out loud on, with weapons or words or whatever. Sometimes it's just defensive, and knowing what we know that we know that we know, and knowing that, and what happens to a marriage if you both know the same thing. I think that is very, very powerful.
That's well put.
Yeah, yeah.
So I've got two questions, and I want you to think about not individuals, but collective. So the collective of just like marriages within our church, we're one church in many or two locations, two physical locations, but we also have an online. And so you get to see a lot of marriages. So you're not thinking about anyone in particular, but within the church, we're speaking of Christians. What is the biggest mistake that married people are making right now? What's the biggest mistake that married people are making right now? And this could be, generally speaking, it could be a stereotype.
I think being selfish. What comes to mind is just looking out for my own. And I'm not thinking of any particular person that, as I look around our congregations, what I see is this family doing this well, this family doing this well. So, yeah, that's what comes to mind.
What is, or can you think of a good test that would help me determine whether or not I'm being selfish? Sorry, I'm completely putting you on the spot.
How often is the word I, me, or mine in the conversation?
There you go. I, me, or mine. See, that's why she's pro. Tim.
Well, unfortunately,
same one or a different one?
I was going to say the amount of times that I hear the word I, and it's overwhelming in struggling marriages. That and believing in falsehoods.
So selfishness and believing in falsehoods. Second question. What is the best thing someone could do for their marriage right now? And if there's not one, maybe there's a couple. But what is the best thing that you could do for your marriage right now?
Ask yourself, is what I'm doing pleasing to God?
Well, I was going to bring comic relief. I don't know if that's allowed or not, but for some people it might be drink copiously.
Burgess.
That
you just lost your coin.
I know. That was a joke, and it was probably a bad one. But
what's the best thing that someone could do for their marriage right now? People within our church that they won't do. or don't do,
that
or
they
should
don't do, to seek help, to stop hiding the truth, and find somebody who is going to be trustworthy that you could seek some suggestions from, and then decide if you're willing to follow up. I would say, second to that is, are you really, really willing to make a change in yourself? If you're not willing to make a change in yourself and you're here for the spouse, then I can't help you.
That's a brilliant thing, because we heard a mutual friend talk about how most people that do actually dare to show up for some type of counseling, spiritual direction, therapy, whatever you want to call it, they don't really want to change themselves. Not all. There are some people that'll show up and say, hey, I need help in changing me. Most people want you to change the other person. I'm here, I need you to help me change my kid. Right. I'm here, I need you to help me change my spouse. And how that type of therapy never, ever, ever works, because you can't control people, places, or things. You can only control you. And so the third question that I had, and I'm going to aim this at men because I am one, I are one, and I can say this. What would either one of you say to the man that says, I don't want to go and get help because all he or she, the therapist, is going to do is focus on me? What would you say to that guy? Because I'm going to tell you, that is the number one reason I've heard from men of why they won't go to therapy, is they've heard, maybe it's gone through the grapevine, that, if I go sit down with my wife and talk to Tim, he's going to look at me. So what do you say to that guy?
Okay, I'll start this one. Number one, I'm not going to call him a coward to his face, but I'm going to realize that there's a cowardly level of denial right there. The reason that they're saying that is because they're afraid some level of truth might come out, right?
And that he'll be found out.
Yes, and the second thing that I would tell them is, I've often had one of the two spouses come in first, and so let's say it was Heidi and I, and Heidi goes and sees John, the therapist, and then she comes back and we have a convo, and I finally agree to go with her. My assumption in my head is that you spent the entire time with her talking about me. And
that's a selfish, self-centered viewpoint.
That's what guys think every single time. That's why guys will verbally and sometimes physically pressure their wives to not see a counselor. And that really frustrates me when I know that's happening. So what I tell people is, even when I was hearing her story and you weren't in the room, I'm smart enough and I've been around the block enough to know that marital issues are 50-50. It might one day be 49-51, but it's never 90-10. So
the issue.
The issue, whatever's going on. So I'm looking at this as a whole, not as an individual. And men have this. So a man can go ahead and date 37 women before he gets married, and he expects a woman to have no problem with that. But if the woman dated one or two people, he's jealous as can be until he can grow up.
Isn't that
right?
something?
And it's that same gene.
So true.
That's that same gene that keeps them from coming in. And so I just say out loud what the truth is. Number one, no matter what you decide, no matter what you tell me, it will stay private. And I'll love you no matter what. I'm not here to judge. I'm here to listen and to try to help and point godly wisdom out. And number two, I'm smart enough to know what the truth is. And it's not what you say. And it's not what she says. It's what the two of you say. That's the truth. Does that make sense?
Yep, absolutely.
Amen.
You want to throw ditto to that one?
Yep.
Okay, so this is the last question. Have you or have you not ever had a brat from the Dublin General Store?
No, I had some really good ones from Wall Ravens Butcher Shop in Cadillac.
But
no free shout-outs.
But there's no free shout-outs. So we here are a Dublin General Store. They provided us with some cheesy brats. They had cheese they had cheese and potatoes inside the brats.
Oh, and potatoes.
Yes, there was one, I'm told. No, sorry, I had this one as well. There was cheese and jalapeno inside the brat. Come on, you raise boys. Heidi, you know that. I mean, that's amazing.
And how, okay, tell me the temp.
I don't know the exact temp, but it was amazing. So it was hot enough to not scald my mouth, and it was backstage.
Could you feel a little sweat?
Oh,
afterward?
from the jalapeno? No.
Oh, okay.
Which actually, didn't make me, because if for me and my palate, if If it's hot enough that it makes me sweat, it's too hot because now I can't feel my mouth and can't taste anything else.
Okay.
Yeah. But I bet you we could have one made.
Well,
that way
no,
for you.
I would be anxious to try that because I had one jalapeno one from an like a generic no name store.
Yeah.
Okay, that I can't mention.
Yeah. And
And
it set you on
It's
fire.
habanero.
and so it had pepper in it, right? It was really awesome, and it was too big for the bun.
Oh my.
So I cut off that last little piece
Yeah.
so it fit, and so I finish it, and then I'm deciding, man, I got this little sheen of sweat. This is awesome. This tastes so good, and I got this little piece, and it's like I don't want to just eat that plain. I'm going to get some chips.
Yeah.
So I set my plate down on the edge of the couch, and I make a mistake. I forgot I had it there. Went outside with my chips for whatever reason, and all of a sudden went, "Why do I have these chips? Oh my gosh! I left that jalapeno
Yeah,
thing
you
in
can't
there.
do that.
I need to go get it quick before the dog does."
Yeah.
And I come running around the corner, and my dog is just finishing taking it off my plate, off the arm of the couch, because I'm such
What happens to the dog?
I'm a simple-minded guy.
Yeah.
And then I kind of like scold the dog, and then I sat there and watched, and I'm going in my brain, I hope that you start yelping, right?
Yeah.
And he didn't. He never went for a drink of water,
Nothing.
and
Habanero, nothing for
nothing.
him.
And I was telling these guys a story, and I was laughing at myself, and it's like, I'm not surprised because what dogs will go ahead and eat anyways.
Yeah, they'll eat anything. We don't have to say it on the
Yeah,
That's
we
the
don't. And so I didn't get my sweet revenge, but with Dublin providing that type of stuff, I would never, ever leave a piece of theirs.
So Dublin,
on a
if you're
plate.
listening, Tim is saying he likes hot brats and he won't leave them for his dog. He promises.
Correct.
Now, I've heard that they make a blueberry brat, which I can't even imagine. Sweet and savory, though, do go together. I've had a bacon chocolate chip cookie that changed my life.
Well,
It
you
was
like chicken
life-changing.
and waffles too, right?
I've only had that a couple times,
Okay.
but now I'm trying to trim it down just a little bit. Heidi, what's your favorite thing? You got a favorite food? You guys like the Tex-Mex stuff or Mexican, right?
Yeah.
Or no?
Yeah.
Well, you like it
Mexican is
all, but-
good.
yeah.
Yeah. I like food. If someone else fixes it.
If I was going to bring you out to a really good place, what would you choose? Anything?
go with you.
Oh wow! Somebody gagged me over here. Yeah.
I love you, Heidi.
I
So
know.
so food's not your love language.
No.
Oh, 100%. I've read all these marriage books that are like, hey, if you're going to date your wife, you need to have a plan. And so really what I had to, it's you need to organize it, you need to prep it, you need to know what she wants, and you just that does not work in our marriage. In our marriage, I might say, yes, we're going out to eat, and this is the thing, and we're not going to worry about the money, and these are the people we're going with. But when it comes time to where we're going, it's not me being passive when I go, babe, where do you want to eat? Because if it's food, I'll eat it.
Yeah.
And I'm in for whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But it depends on the day, the time, the hour, the minute, what kind of food she's in the mood for.
Yeah.
And so I'm not loving her well if I don't go, no, we said we're going here. I don't care if you're in the mood for that. It's like, what are you in the mood for? I need to know. We've got 20 minutes on the way to Traverse City. That's usually where we're going to make the reservation because she's a foodie. I'm not a foodie. She wants to do food trucks one night. She wants to do fancy. She wants to do steak. It's usually steak.
I'm going to arm you with a little bit of ammunition for the next time somebody tells you something like that.
What's that?
That guy is a checklist guy.
He's a checklist
and you
guy.
just tell him, back off, checklist guy.
Back off, checklist guy. Yeah, yeah. And there's like there's so many other little, like we could do a whole thing just on stupid marriage myths.
Yeah.
Like I'll confess this one. How many marriage books that I read that began this way, right? Hey, husbands, would you like your wife to be more responsive to you? More da-da-da-da-da. Well, what you need to do is play with the kids. And then there's this testimonial. When I saw my husband, John, playing with the kids on the floor, then I knew he really loved me. And it made me want to turn into blah, 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 blah. Usually talking about something about intimacy or do the dishes and effectively turn our wives, right, into these little prostitutes, basically. If I put in my good, instead of I should play with my kids because I love my kids, or I should do the dishes because they're my dishes too.
It's
right?
It's completely heretical theology.
Complete
is what it is. It's
Yeah.
what I do
It's
is
getting, not
yeah. I
giving.
mean, it's the gospel ladder upside down for marriage.
100%.
There you go.
Huh.
Is I put in my good works
can
and
you-
I get this good behavior.
Can you
and
work on that? Make a gospel ladder for marriage.
for
us?
marriage? I think that would be good.
Yeah.
To be honest,
I'm leaving it up to you. I'm giving
Yeah.
you a task.
Oh, thank you, sir.
You're very welcome.
I will accept that task.
Yeah.
But I do know that if I brought my wife some delicious brats from Dublin General Store, who we love. Almost as good as Trace Cakes.
Trace Cakes.
Have you had a Trace cake? Have you had a Trace cookie?
More than one.
Yeah.
I have not, but I did reach out to her, and she will give you customer service beyond.
Really? Customer service beyond belief. What is your favorite form of pastry? Do you have a favorite pastry? Because I do not. Like
No.
I'm a pie guy.
I'm not a sweet.
Tim, what about you?
chips.
Pastry?
Yeah.
No, I don't even know what they are.
Cookies.
Is it in the donut category?
It might be,
I
yeah.
like
Oh, she
Butter
makes great
cookies.
donuts.
I like really fresh the little white sugar donuts, not powder, but the white sugary ones.
Right.
That's what I like.
Right. Benjamin, do you have a favorite?
Comment #marriage if you want us to completely butcher all these terrible marriage books. Just saying.
Just saying. Perfect. We will do that. So comment, or thank you, Benjamin. We have a brand new thing that Britain's gone that we're going to introduce here. There's an email address for the podcast.
Ooh.
So if you have a question about anything, it could be about marriage, it could be about an old podcast, it could be about, hey, I want a podcast on this. Hey, what does John or Britton or whomever think about this? It could be a Bible question, a theology question, apologetics question. You can email us at tabpodcast@thetabchurch.com. I know that's a lot of letters, but that's our website, thetabchurch.com. So if you just remember tabpodcast@thetabchurch.com, we want to answer your questions. We've asked for that before on social media. We didn't get a lot of questions, but my dream would be to have an entire podcast where we've got a list of people's questions. We're just answering questions. So it doesn't matter what it's about. If you don't want us to share your name, we won't. We may just share first names, or we may not share names at all to protect the innocent. But it's tabpodcast@thetabchurch.com. Send us your emailed questions or comments or what have you. Or, you can get in touch with us and we'll give you our address so you can send us brats. I'm just saying. So, yeah. Anything else you have on marriage or whatever, Tim or Heidi or Benjamin? Anything else you want to add?
Benjamin?
No.
No, he says.
All right, good.
All of his vast
Heidi?
experience in marriage.
All hearts clear.
I would say I would like Britton to memorize this podcast.
Britton, if you're listening, what are the chances he actually listens to this podcast?
0.
0. No, you know what? We'll get Hope on the case.
Oh, wait.
Yeah,
This
we'll get Hope on.
isn't going to come out until...
He's married. Yeah,
Okay.
when this comes out, he's married. He may or may not be listening to this with Hope on his honeymoon.
Right?
Maybe on the drive.
That's possible.
Yeah, that's good.
Possible.
That's
Well,
good.
she's so amazing that I could actually see that happening.
Yeah, this is true.
Yeah.
And he's amazing enough that he wants to please her and love her the way Christ loved the church. He might endure it.
True.
Yeah, this is true. So, well, thank you, Heidi, for coming here, for being real, for sharing a woman's perspective with strength and dignity. Tim, for the wisdom, as always. We love having you here. I'll try to do a better job next time of having snacks for you. Tim was getting a little low on the blood sugar, so if you heard a little mouse in the microphone, that was Tim trying to get a little something going. But until next time, this is Tim Burgess, the right good Reverend, worshipful master, Tim and his wife Heidi, and Benjamin, and myself, John. Until next time, signing off.